Adam, the Oregon Ducks, the 8th-ranked Oregon Ducks, are coming to Boulder this week, and great timing for the Buffs, right? Obviously coming off of a tough one last week against Arizona State, a game that was entertaining, if nothing else. The Buffs didn't get the win, but certainly a significant challenge this week. What are your thoughts as the Buffs are preparing for the Ducks this week?
Yeah, I mean, 31.5-point underdogs. No one expects Colorado to even compete in this football game. So I guess on some level, this program has nothing to lose, right? It's interesting. I was doing a Q&A with our Oregon site, and they asked me, what qualities is Colorado looking for in its next head coach? And I started thinking about that, and I was like, it's kind of what Mike Sanford's been doing the last month here. He really has knocked it out of the park, but then you reflect on it and you go, they needed to beat Arizona State for him to have any chance, it felt like, to be a real candidate to be the permanent, head coach here going forward. And so that was unfortunate. That was probably a loss that had to sting a little bit for some of these coaches, just because it was a winnable game that if you got a little bit more of a consistent performance out of the quarterback position and obviously covered up the middle of the field better as a defense, that was a winnable football game. So that's tough to bounce back from that. But now, like I said, you kind of completely shift focus in the month of November, and it's, hey, we just got to play the role of spoiler, and they'll probably go 0-4, but if they find a way to put it all together in there, it wouldn't necessarily be shocking. It would be shocking this Saturday, and shocking out at USC, a program you've never beaten, but maybe at Washington, or I don't know, even Utah, depending on their health going into that game. Maybe there's a chance, but no one's going to give it to this team. And Mike Sanford said, hey, if you want to conduct an orchestra, you got to turn your back to the crowd. So he's saying and trying to do everything he can, but these players are not dumb. They understand that, there's a juggernaut coming here to Boulder this weekend.
Yeah, and hey, when they're losing 42-9 to Oregon State, who's a good team, not like these next four teams, right? When they're losing 42-9 to teams like that, 41-10 to Air Force, 49-7 to Minnesota, and now you're facing four teams, maybe the four best teams in your schedule coming up. You're right. These players aren't dumb. They're still competitive. They still want to compete. They still, I imagine, have that belief in themselves. They can go out and play better, and that's great. You have to have that. And I will say that's one thing that I've been impressed with throughout this entire season is I don't know how these players have done it, but they seem to have kept that buy-in. My senior year of high school, we weren't very good, and it was hard to keep that buy-in. I know high school is different and things like that, but I've been impressed with at least the message we've heard from the players. They've kept buying in, and they keep fighting, and so that's why I give CU a shot to make it somewhat entertaining and competitive this week. I don't give them a shot to win the game, but to at least put up a fight a little bit and not let Oregon just run away with it.
Well, what's different about you in high school is you knew that was the end, right?
Yeah.
Well, on this football team, you've got two different groups of players. You've got one group that is nearing the end, and like we heard Quinn Perry say on Tuesday, he wants to be remembered in a good way around here.
Yeah.
But he also has, whether they're realistic or not, he's got aspirations to go play pro football, and there's a lot of guys on the tail end of their career here that have that goal, and so they're going to be motivated. Yeah. And then on the other side of it, there are so many young players that are part of the mix right now that are developing, and certainly they don't want to embarrass themselves out there. So yeah, it makes sense why there hasn't been the quit, but it still is impressive with that 30-day window these guys had to enter the transfer portal after Carl Durrell got fired, that we didn't see any starters do that. And so from that level, what Mike Sanford's done getting the buy-in has been impressive.
Yeah. You have to throw in the fact that I'm sure there's some of these guys that are thinking transfer portal, right? And they're wanting to put good tape for maybe their next team. And so there's going to be guys that leave in the portal. We know that. I mean,
there has to be, in order for them to even sign the number of guys they have committed in high school right now. So I know some people focus on the sheer number of guys that entered the portal from CU.
Yeah.
It wasn't the issue of how many, it was those six starters that left.
And that's the thing that worries people when Jordan Tyson played so well last week against Arizona State. I'm sure you've heard it as well, but I don't know how many people I've heard from say, well, who's he going to be playing for next year? People get worried about that, and I understand it, but that's the thing you have to worry about if you're not only Mike Sanford, but Rick George, people like that, can we keep some of these young guys here? But I guess to your point, I mean, there's a lot of reasons for motivation for these guys, and that could be one of them, is that some of these guys are already thinking, what can I do for next year? Where could I go? You hope that a lot of these guys, that Jordan Tyson's thinking, I'm staying here in Boulder, right? But we'll see. But either way, there's still that motivation, right? No matter what the reasons, right? There's still some fight in this team, and I think that's commendable as they come into the final month.
And building off that is the job number one of the next head coach is. Yeah. You've got to recruit this roster, because Mike Sanford said it at the press conference, if we have to hit reset on this roster again like they did last year, that's not going to be good for anything, I think is how he phrased it. And if you don't stop that at some point, you are continually in this reoccurring cycle. You're in quicksand as a program. And that's why I asked Mike Sanford when he was talking about the NIL collective that got announced by Buffs for Life. Obviously it's important for bringing talent here, but from my perspective, it's maybe even more important to keep the talent that you already have in Boulder around. You can criticize Karl Dorrell for a lot of things. He actually did a pretty good job of finding some under-the-radar type of recruits during his time here.
Yep.
Even we're seeing right now that some of the guys that fans weren't particularly excited about as commits, they're getting looks from other Power 5 programs right now. A receiver just flipped over to Kansas State. So it's not like you've got all these commitments that nobody else wants. They haven't landed the blue chippers, and that's something that the next head coach has to do, because you want to take a step up in that. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that Karl Dorrell's recruiting was deserves an A grade or even a B grade, but there were quality guys that he found, and so the Nico Reeds of the world that not a lot of people want out of high school that have developed into pretty good players here. Kalen Moore, you can go down the list. Offensively, there's a ton of guys. And you mentioned Jordan Tyson. So between the NIL collective and the next head coach making that a priority, that's got to be what this program does if they want to get out of the cellar in the Pac-12.
And to your point, I mean, the guys that fans worry about losing are the guys that Karl Dorrell brought here. So you got to give him some credit for bringing some of this good young talent here. Anthony Hankerson's another one that very under the radar. I know he had a lot of offers, but I don't know how many of them were committable offers at the end, but there is a lot of those young guys that Karl Dorrell did bring here. You want to keep them, and I agree with you that that's the number one thing. I was asked that, what's the number one priority this week? I was asked, what are the top priorities for the next head coach? I said, number one, keep the guys you have. I think that has to be the number one thing. And so I think it's a big month for Colorado in a lot of ways. They're not going to win. I don't think they're going to win any football games in the month of November, but I think it's a huge month for them, and it starts with Oregon. And hey, if nothing else, we get to see one of the best teams in the country at Folsom Field, and a legit Heisman candidate in Bo Nix, who is, forget the Auburn days. I mean, Bo Nix is a new Bo Nix in Oregon, and he's leading the Pac-12 in rushing touchdowns, and he's one of the top quarterbacks in the country. So that's pretty impressive.
Yeah, well, it's interesting too. Is Bo Nix's best year at Auburn was his freshman year, and Kenny Dillingham was the guy that was coaching him back then. So those guys have a great relationship. Kenny Dillingham, now the OC at Oregon, and his name is starting to pop up a little bit. He's really young. He's in his young 30s right now. Maybe too young to be a head coach of a Power 5 program, but he's got ties to Arizona State, and there's a lot of boosters down in Tempe that are pushing for him to get the job down there. So he's done a great job with that Oregon team. You look across the board, there's really not a glaring weakness of that team aside from defensively, third down efficiency. They have not been able to get off the field very well. So that's the only area I see as an area you could exploit Oregon. And it's funny, I was asked by the Oregon folks, what does Colorado have to do to pull off the upset? I'm sitting there going, this is kind of a dumb question, because the answer is everything has to go right for Colorado. You have to get off to a early start, gain confidence, have Oregon at least nervous a little bit. You've got to win the turnover margin by a very sizable margin, and then JT Shroud has to be a quarterback that we have not seen him to be in college yet.
Yeah.
The consistency has not been there, and you can't expect any of those things to happen. So I don't know if we're getting into predictions yet, but
Well, and you certainly can't expect all of them to happen because they all need to happen for them to have a shot to win this game.
yeah, no, I don't think you can expect that to happen.
Right. So I guess let's get into predictions for this game. Obviously Oregon, like you mentioned, favored by 31.5 points, 31 wherever you look. The Buffs are not expected to compete in this one. What's your score prediction?
I remember there's been a couple games in the past where Oregon's been a favorite similar to this, and a couple of those times they covered that spread by halftime. So it sounds like a ton of points, but I think Oregon will most likely cover that spread on Saturday. And hopefully for everybody's sake, aside from those wearing green in that building on Saturday, it's closer than I'm predicting, because we'd all like to see a more entertaining football game. But I think Oregon runs away with it. You mentioned after the game on Saturday that Oregon, it's style points for them right now too. It's not just winning football games.
Right.
So give me the Ducks winning this one 52-17.
Okay. I'm thinking similar way. The Ducks, though, the one you mentioned weaknesses, if anything, they've given up more points than anybody in the top 6 of the conference. And the only team that scored less than 20 against them is Eastern Washington. CU's offense probably has been on par with about that, honestly. But I'm going to say that the Ducks streak of giving up 20 points continues. So I'm going to give the Buffs 20 points in this one. But Oregon's going to score a lot. And I'm going to go 59-20, and Oregon runs away with this thing. And it's not a pretty football game, but I think we'll still hear, hey, there were some positives, there were some things that we saw, but I think Oregon wins this one going away 59-20.
Yeah, it's hard to envision this being a close football game. That's just the reality of the situation. I don't know, what is it, a 0.1% chance for it to be one of those memorable Saturdays at Folsom Field, but you certainly can't predict that it's going to be the case.
I think the weather's going to be good, so we'll see. But should be a fun day out at Folsom Field. We'll see. But Adam and I will be back afterwards to talk about it.